Hi everybody. So far, the components we've been creating and the things we've been showing up on screen have been looking kind of plain. We added some simple styling to the content, but in this video, we're going to kick that styling knowledge up a few notches by learning how to properly style our content in React. So in React, you have two ways for styling content. Well, really, one new way and one old way that you've always been using. Let's start with the old way. Approach number one. This approach is where you're using style tags, style selectors, all the various things you've been using to style your content for the web for many years. So nothing new here. With React, you can totally use this old approach. Now, there's another approach though, and this one is more React specific. This is an approach where instead of dealing with CSS, you create a JavaScript object that contains all the style properties and the various things you want your content to look like. So therefore, you're going to have a situation where, and Pixel makes an appearance once more. Say hi to everyone, Pixel. Pixel is a big fan of styling content in React, so whenever I talk about it, he likes to walk right by. So where were we? Yeah, so approach number two. This is an approach where we style all of our content, but it's done entirely in JavaScript without using any bit of CSS. So we're going to take a look at both these approaches in a little bit more detail by looking at a very simple example. So I'm going to quickly go to my code editor. If you've been watching my previous videos, this arrangement should look pretty familiar to you. I've divided my screen into two halves. Well, not halves, I guess, but 3/4 and 1/4. But the bulk of my screen is showing up my code editor, which is Visual Studio Code. And then on the right-hand side, I have my browser, which is just providing a preview of the page that I'm currently working on. So speaking of the page, take a moment to take a look at what we have here. It's mostly the same empty blank React app, that starting point, that we've been using for the past few examples. There's some minor tweaks I made to it. We're still referencing the same React DOM and React core libraries along with Babel to turn a JSX into something a browser understands. I just have a style tag here, which is hashtag container, padding 50 pixels, background color, hashtag FFF. And then my HTML has a body element with a div element also inside it with an ID value of container. And that's really pretty much it. Everything else is just standard boilerplate starting point logic, or in this case, just markup. So what we're going to do now is build up a small example to highlight how we can style our content. So the first thing we're going to do is this. We're going to have my script tag, and inside it, let's go ahead and make a reference to our container element. I'm going to do var destination equals document.querySelector and hashtag container. All right. So with now our destination variable contains a reference to our container markup element. That's pretty great. Now let's go ahead and create our React DOM call. React DOM.render, and it's going to be multiple lines. I'm going to go ahead and add the parentheses, and let's make the first argument be the content we're going to be printing. So div, and inside this div, I'm going to create a component called letter A, letter, and right now ignore any output question you might be seeing from your console. Letter A. I'm going to copy and paste it a few times. A, B, C, D. Not really. It's actually going to be vowels. So A, E, I, O, and U. And the next thing is going to be the React DOM render takes two arguments, so it's going to be destination. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear out the spacing. And so now we have our React DOM.render call completed. All that is missing really is a letter component that I am instantiating, but doesn't quite exist. So this should be straightforward if you followed along in the previous video. So class letter extends React.component, and let's go ahead and create the angle brackets. And what I'm going to render is going to be just the letters that you want to see up on screen. So I'm going to do return. And the contents of what I'm going to be returning are going to be a div element. And inside the div element will be this.props.children, because the content we want to display are letters A, E, I, O, U. And then that's what we're going to be printing out. And the way we do that is by using the children property that lives on our props object. Okay, let's go and see where the error is showing up. Oh, and remember, when we're using script and we're using the Babel in browser transformation, we just specify type equals text/Babel. And I think that should make the errors go away. One way to find out is by seeing what it looks like in our browser. So I just saved this file. Let me refresh it to make sure everything works. And yep, let me zoom in a bit. And you can now see the letters A, E, I, O, U displayed. So here's a starting point for what we're going to style, hopefully in some pretty interesting ways, using both the traditional approach, using the style tag, and the more React-y approach, which is using everything in JavaScript. There's a hybrid approach, which we'll see much later in a future video, but just know that these are 2 points that we're going to be focusing on, at least for right now. So using the CSS approach, it's going to be pretty straightforward. And so what we're going to do is just add a style tag and just add some content into it. And so let me look at my notes to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and in the style region, I'm going to specify what it's going to look like. So we have a div element. So we set a div element. So we have 3 layers of div elements. So if I were to be very simplistic in this, I'll just do 3 divs right next to each other as part of my style rule. And then type in padding 10 pixels, margin 10 pixels, background color. Let's give it some, hashtag FFDEOO, which is like a nice yellow color. The background color, the color of the text will be a dark gray. Let's see, display will be inline block. So the thing I want you to focus on is that there's nothing interesting or new about how to style your content using the traditional style tag with CSS style rules. It's just your normal CSS properties and their values. So bear with me while I wrap up a few of them. Might as well do it properly, right? So font family, don't really care. Give it monospace. And font size is going to be 32 pixels. And make text align set to be center. All right. So let's go and save and see what this looks like. And once I've done that, you'll see that our text now looks a little bit different. Let me zoom out just a little bit so you can see the fonts a bit better. So all in one row. So now you see the vowels all displayed with a background color that's yellow with the monospace font that is displayed the way you see right here. So not too shabby using some style rules. But the thing is, you'll rarely type in div as part of your style rule selector, because for a simple app like this, you can get away with it. But in more complex apps, you'll have many layers of nested divs, and having something as generic as what we have here might cause, or certainly will cause, the wrong elements to actually get impacted. So what we're going to do is actually use a way of styling them by using a class value. So let's go ahead and rename our selector to be letter. So we're going to have a class value that's going to be defined as letter. And so what we want to do now is just make sure that our element is appropriately aware of it so it can be styled. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to go to my div element, and because we're not dealing with multiple layers of children, we're applying it directly, let's apply to the div that we want to style, which is the div that is inside our letter component itself. So you might think that by just typing in class equals, and in case letter, I'll be fine. Well, the thing is, this is where you'll start seeing more of the cases where JSX is like HTML, it's not quite HTML. The word class is actually not something you can use in JSX. It's a reserved keyword, mostly because of its JavaScript background. So if you want to use the class attribute, you actually need to call it class name. The end result is identical to what the class attribute HTML would do, but class name is what you need to use in specifying JSX to make sure that everything is placed well, nicely. All right, setting class name, hitting letter, I'm hitting refresh. And so, as expected, the end result is the same, but the only difference is that instead of having a style selector that is kind of unusable for the most part in real world scenarios, you have one that is more appropriate and more targeted for what we are trying to do. So it's really the style approach where it is pretty nothing new, right? All of this stuff should have been a review for you if you know CSS, which I'm pretty sure all of you do. Now let's go ahead and start looking at how to style content the React way. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the class name attribute and its value just to get our content back to looking like its plain, dull, and boring self. All right, we now have our div element, no styling applied. We're going to style it now using the way React would like you to style content. So in the React approach, the way you style content is this. You specify everything in JavaScript as part of a style object. And a style object is nothing special. It's just a JavaScript object with each property and its value being the CSS property and its value. So really no suspense there. So I'm going to a new object called var letter style, and it's going to just be an empty object right now. But what I'm going to put inside it though is almost a word for word translation of what you see right here. The only variation is that you can't use CSS style names. You can use the more traditional JavaScript type names. You can get away with using the CSS style name in newer browsers, but just for now, or consistency, I'm going to keep it with the more traditional camel case syntax. So padding 10, margin also 10, background color. Notice that it's not background dash color, it's actually background color camel cased. Hashtag FFDEOO. So far, a lot of it's going to be repetition. So hashtag 333, display, inline block, font family will be monospace, font size will be 32 pixels. Let's make sure we specify the formatting properly. And text align is center. All right. Okay, now that we've created a style object, all that remains is to actually apply our style to the element we wish to apply our style to. So just like before, we're going to go to div element. We're going to define an attribute called style, and the content of our style will be the style object we just created. And notice that because we're in JSX, we want to make sure that we don't specify letter style directly, but instead specify it as part of the curly braces to make sure that it is actually rendered as an expression and calculated as opposed to just displaying the text letter style directly. And also, everything in this case has to be text because it's not a number or a primitive. So let's go ahead and type the value center in quotation marks. I forgot to do that earlier. All right, now let's refresh the page to see how this looks. Yep, as you can expect, nothing really should be different. The only thing that's changed really is how these styles are getting applied. In fact, if I were to go look at it, let's go back and bring up the dev tools. Notice that, let me bring this docket to the bottom and zoom in. If you look at the markup that you see here, notice that each element, all the styles you specified here, they're inline styles. As you can imagine, everything is specified in our letter style object. It's applied individually to each element that gets displayed. Now, if you're a traditional web developer or someone who's probably grown up hearing that inline styling is bad, I tend to agree with you. It is not the greatest way. It's not my first choice in how I would style content, how to specify content is styled, but you got to look at it this way. What you're doing though is you're specifying it all entirely in one location in JavaScript. The end result of React doing its magic is what applies it to every element. So it is a little yucky from here to think about what your browser is doing to make our styling work. But from your point of view as a developer, you're not really doing a whole lot of extra work. You're defining it in one location. So code maintenance and things are pretty straightforward. So, just one of those little things that might seem a little distasteful at first, but you get familiar with it as time goes on. And so now the thing is this. Because we have everything in JSX, we have it in JavaScript, it's all within the confines of our component, a little bit more things that you can actually do. So for example, the style color right now is hard-coded to basically be this yellow background color, right? Now imagine we could actually modify it a bit to take the value here, not as a hard-coded value, but something you pass in as a prop, something we can actually parameterize as part of calling each letter component. So what we're going to do is this. In our going back to React download render, we're going to specify a prop called BG color, and we're going to specify the color we actually want to pass into the element to have it be styled. So here's going to be a lot of weird colors that I found from a color palette generator. So it's 58B, 3FF. Feel free to keep it more simple. Just use your normal yellows, reds, and keywords like that. But I'm just going to copy and paste all of this in just to make, avoid some typing. So for the second value, it's going to be FF605F. The third color is going to be FFD52E. The fourth value is going to be 49DD8E. And the last value is going to be AE99FF. All right, so now if I refresh it, actually no, all I just did was specify a BG color prop and then the color value. There's no knowledge of this color in our component itself. And so for that, I'm going to go to the background color property and replace the current hard-coded hash, the hex value with this dot props dot bgcolor background color. That's it. So now if I refresh the page, you'll now see that each of our vowels is now displayed in its own different color as we specified as part of instantiating each letter component. Now, here's one thing to pay attention to though. Notice that this props.bg color is not wrapped in the curly braces like we had done before, and that is because right here, this region right here, is not JSX. It's just straight up JavaScript. And when you're in JavaScript territory, everything is evaluated as an expression. You don't have to do anything special to designate that. Whereas JSX, primarily the stuff inside your return statement, that is not considered pure JavaScript, at least in the terms of how React views things. So that's why we had to actually explicitly wrap, for example, the letter cell object in terms of the angle brackets, and the curly brackets. And that's why also the previous video, when we were looking at props the first time around, we also had the props that were defined inside our JSX, also inside the curly brackets. So just keep that in mind as to when to put the curly brackets and when not. If you were to accidentally mix and match it, don't worry. You'll see an error. React is very particular about letting you know that you made a mistake, so you'll be able to fix it very quickly. And so that's really the bulk of the styling that we've seen here. And so let's go ahead and wrap this video up. So you have two approaches, as you can imagine. One is using this traditional style tags or CSS files and all the things that go with it. The other is the more React-centric approach where you have a JavaScript object that defines all the styles that you see here. Now, which approach tends to work for you is entirely up to your particular scenario. I tend to mix and match between both approaches. One advantage of using the style rule approach is that, well, it's CSS. We've used it for a long time, and you don't have to define a specific style object for every single element you're trying to style. There are ways, there are extensions, and there are things you can find for React that can try to mimic the CSS flexibility of having style rules and inheritance and things like that in your JavaScript world. It's a little clunky. The approach of using a JavaScript object, it's one that is great if you're trying to do more of the React-y things, like for example, have some of your CSS values be parameterized using props and doing some of the more JavaScript calculations as part of defining your styles as well. And like I mentioned earlier, there is a third approach, which is a hybrid of both of the things that we've seen here, but that's something you're going to see much later as part of building our application using Webpack and Babel and having a more modern development workflow where each of your components is going to be an individual file associated with its own CSS file where you're going to be writing normal normal CSS. So keep that in mind as under your pocket for something that we'll look at later. All right, if you have any questions about this video, go to the forums, post at forum@krupa.com, where I and others will be happy to help you out very quickly. If you like this video, tell your friends and enemies all about it, and subscribe to be notified of other videos like this that I'll be making in the future. Find me at Krupa on Twitter, where I post a lot of things that I find interesting that maybe you'll find interesting as well, especially if you like cat videos. And there's also a book form of all this React material you're seeing here that goes into greater detail in text form with pictures and things like that of how to use React and how to learn it and how to be better at it. All right, with that, I will see you guys next time.